I kind of created my own personal compass in deciding what it is that I wanted to do. And so for me, the governing kind of overarching word that really helped guide me was the word passion. And really interesting because I think for a lot of my life, I didn't feel super passionate about something. But what I did notice, Francesca, is that I always lit up when I talked about my past research on interview anxiety. And so I think it's really important to kind of like think about and to have some insight into your life and think about what are the conversations and the things that I'm talking about where I tend to sparkle.
Many people want to navigate life with peace and joy, but struggle to connect to their intuition. They find themselves overwhelmed, burned out, and frustrated. My name is Francesca Phillips, and I'm obsessed with spirituality and psychology and how the two can intersect to help you live a successful and intuitive life. I believe each of us can accomplish amazing things through balance and healthy habits instead of burnout. Consider this your go-to resource for where spiritual wellness and mindful productivity meets practical wisdom. If you're craving positivity and want to know how to find the answers within instead of searching endlessly without, then you're in the right place. Get ready to feel supported and inspired. This is the Good Space Podcast. You're listening to the Good Space Podcast, episode number 22, How to Understand and Manage Your Emotions Better with Dr. Amanda Tobe. Before we dive in, I want to give my warm appreciation to our reviewer of the week, Taylor Morgan Design. And they say, The Good Space is one of my new favorite podcasts. It truly is a good space where you combine productivity with spirituality and how they connect. It gives me a deeper understanding of myself and my patterns and teaches me how to improve in the best way possible. As an entrepreneur, I have learned how to own my time better and set healthy boundaries for myself and my work. I have learned so much from Francesca over the years, following her on social media too. And I'm so excited for her to have a podcast platform to share her knowledge with us even more. Tune into the show if you want to feel good and do better. Thank you so much, Taylor Morgan Design, for sharing your generous words. I'm so happy the show and my content has resonated as much as it has. You're so appreciated. I'm sending you lots of love and gratitude. If you want to be highlighted in an upcoming episode and help further the mission of the Good Space, make sure to subscribe and give us a review on Apple Podcasts so I can then highlight your review in an upcoming episode. It only takes a minute. You can pause the episode and come right back. Make sure to screenshot this episode on your phone and tag us on your Instagram story at @FindYourGoodSpace, #TheGoodSpace, to let me know that you're joining in today, as you know that I love to share those screenshots on our stories too. If you're afraid to unearth something within you or have a creative longing but don't know how to let it out, then I invite you to join my Creative Connection group. It's a writing group that's a sacred space for you to work on your creative expression and get positive, constructive feedback from others in the group. This is for beginner and professional writers alike. All are encouraged to join. So to learn more, go to bit.ly/join Creative Connection. It'll also be linked in the show notes. So just a little bit more about the meetings itself. I'll lead each session with a spiritual thought and provide writing prompts. Then you can read what you wrote to the group, who then shares what was most memorable or strong. Whether you have a book you're working on or need to release some stress, this group is perfect for letting your voice come out. There is one guideline everyone must follow. Anything shared is treated as fiction. That way you and others can feel safe sharing without worrying about judgment. This group is meant to help you feel seen and heard, to find your voice, to give you the space to test out ideas, to grow as a human and creative. If your soul resonates with this message even a little, please click the link in the show notes and join us now. Welcome to the Good Space Podcast. Today we are going to talk about how to understand and manage your emotions better. And today's guest is super amazing. I'm really excited for you to get to know her better. Dr. Amanda Tobe is an organizational psychologist based in Toronto and works with clients to build their confidence, manage stress, communicate effectively, and overcome performance anxiety in the workplace. She works with teams and leaders to build healthy, psychologically safe, and mindful workplaces. Amanda has also written several publications on public speaking and job interview anxiety and has been featured in media outlets such as Inc.com, Harvard Business Review, Men's Health Magazine, and the Journal of Business and Psychology. In the last 2 years, she made a major career pivot in wanting to help others find their inner voice and unleash their full potential. Amanda, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation.
Same. When I learned about you from my podcast producer, I was so excited because everything that you talk about is just so aligned with everything I teach on the Good Space. And I love how you have the intellectual side of things while at the same time you're really good at centering and knowing what's aligned for you. And so I love that mix of the energy and the intellectual. Have you always been that way?
I'm not sure if I've always been that way, but it's really interesting that you say that, because when I started out on my journey to pursue my license, one of like the values that really kind of came to the surface for me that I felt like was so important was really trying to take science and trying to put it in a more accessible way for people. And I wanted to make it more conversational, and I wanted people to understand, what is this research even about? Because I've been on the other side of producing publications and writing them and thinking, who's going to even understand this? I mean, even my own parents don't understand it, and they've been hearing me talk about the research for years, right? So it was really important to me. So accessibility is so important to me. So that's why I wanted to take research and make it in a way that people actually understand it and can actually be then excited about it.
That's great. And that's essentially how the Good Space was started. Is I wanted spiritual concepts to be accessible to people, because I would have so many friends and even my husband say, I don't know where to start. I don't have time to read all those books. And even then, when I hear people speak about it, it's so vague to me that I just kind of leave it and go on with my day. And so, yes, love that viewpoint that you have. So in your interview on another podcast, you mentioned how you got your PhD in organizational psychology, then you worked internally for a large retailer leading projects in talent management, and you liked what you did. But when you had your second daughter, you realized you wanted to be more passionate and in love with your work. So you ended up entertaining a few different career paths before deciding to pursue your license as an organizational psychologist. So how did you get that clarity on what you wanted to do and not on what others wanted you to do?
I always get goosebumps when I actually talk about the answer to this question, because although I think I kind of went through this question a couple of years ago, in some ways it feels like it was just yesterday when I kind of was working through this. So for me, it was really about two things. The first one is really about learning to listen to your inner voice. And for me, when I think about my life, but not really like getting clear on like what lights me up inside. And so I was really intentional about kind of operating from a place of getting really clear on, listening to my own inner voice and reclaiming that for myself. So one of the things I actually did is I told some people around me, family and friends, that right now, this is the journey that I'm on, and I'm actually not looking for your opinions. So I think that I was kind of really explicit about telling some of my, for example, my parents or my family, just saying, right now, I actually am not looking for opinions. So that was the first thing. And the second thing I would also say is that I kind of created my own personal compass in deciding what it is that I wanted to do. And so for me, the governing kind of overarching word that really helped guide me was the word passion. And it's really interesting because I think for a lot of my life, I didn't feel super passionate about something. But what I did notice, Francesca, is that I always lit up when I talked about my past research on interview anxiety. And so I think it's really important to kind of like think about and to have some insight into your life and think about what are the conversations and the things that I'm talking about where I tend to sparkle. Where do I light up? And what are the things that really make me feel really excited inside? So for me, there was a few times along my journey when I was thinking about, other jobs and things that I potentially would do. So there was actually a couple of weeks where I thought of an app idea and I was like, okay, maybe I'll do this really cool app idea. But then I really asked myself, am I going to feel passionate about that? And the answer was no. So that was those two things were really important to me in kind of governing my career choice.
That's really powerful. And I love that for you, understanding your passion was what made you sparkle when you talked about it or did it. Because I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I can only do something if I'm always passionate about it. Or like that's, that fire. Like I feel like with my work with the Good Space, I am passionate about it, but there are days where I'm like I don't want to show up. But if I always depended on that feeling, then I probably would never get anything done. But it's different than having a sparkle when you speak about something, or like you light up when you are in a particular, place or whatever the case may be. And that's something that I've been trying to work on as well. And that's so insightful. And then the fact that you tell people it's not open for an opinion. Like I'm not looking for an opinion. Oh my gosh. Like if I learned that earlier in my life, I'm like imagining all the things that, would have been accomplished, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, everything's for a reason, but I love that. I love that idea. So what does your spiritual practice look like?
So for me, I would say my spiritual practice is really about getting clear on how I want to feel in my life and designing my life then around those ways that I want to feel and being really tangible then around, reaching those ways that I want to feel through putting things into my life, or like, let's say saying yes and no to certain things. I'm really aware of the things I'm saying yes and no to and the feelings that they're going to engender, and really getting clear on how those feelings and how I then want to feel. And so it's actually a practice that I take some of my clients through, is creating your own personal compass. And it's kind of like based on Danielle Laporte's work, adapted from her work. And so I adapted some of Danielle Laporte's work and helped my clients also in kind of getting clear on some of the feelings that they want to feel. And then let's actually tease apart and think about how you can actually build those things into your life. And so for me, if I have to really break it down for you on a more tangible level, there's a few things that keep my spirit feeling really strong. And the three things would be, one is having a nighttime gratitude practice. So every single night with my husband, we call it Thankful Threes. And we take turns in kind of saying something that we're really thankful about from the day. And we're really specific about what it is that we're grateful for. So it's not just, I'm grateful for my family and my friends and, my house that I live in. I mean, those things can be great too, but also really thinking about the day and what specifically, was there a really great latte I had that really started my day off really great? Or was there something, maybe something came in earlier than I expected. Let's say there was a shipment from Amazon or whatever it was, right? But why I also love this practice, by the way, is because it also gives you insight into somebody's day without you saying to them, what did you do today? It's not like the classic or cliche question about what did you do? So I love that. The second thing I'm also big on is taking a walk at least daily. So for me, walks make me feel really alive. And so I really try to build that into my day. The third thing I would say is taking really deep breaths and having a couple of really good deep breaths throughout the day. So really trying to take a full deep inhale and exhale. And actually one of the things that I'm starting to make a more conscious effort of doing is taking inhales and exhales with my nose, because there's research showing that it's more efficient and effective when we breathe in and out through our nostrils. And so I'm also trying to do that because it also engages your parasympathetic nervous system. So there's just a few things that I'm doing right now. And then emotional check-ins throughout the day, kind of constantly asking myself, how am I feeling? What do I need more of? And really honoring what my mind and my body and my soul needs, and kind of doing those check-ins with myself.
It's great. Oh, it's so wonderful. In my mind, I'm thinking, I can imagine myself even 3 or 4 years ago and hearing something like this and being like, oh, that sounds like so much work. It's so hard. Do I always have to do that? And I feel like, does it get easier over time to have those kinds of habits, like those, check-ins throughout the day? And then, I don't know, I'm just thinking for the person who maybe feels overwhelmed by that.
I would actually say, if I had to, the walk aside, if I have to add up the other pieces, it might only take 5 or 10 minutes total out of my day to do all those things. But for me, actually, it's the emotional check-ins, as an example, isn't something I really have to say to myself, okay, it's emotional check-in time. And I don't set an alarm on my phone or my calendar. But what I actually do notice is I really tune into my breath. So if my breath is feeling really shallow, as an example, if it's feeling really tight in my chest, do I need to take a really deep breath to kind of cleanse that and to let that go? So that's a way that I am practicing taking deep breaths. Or even, for example, when I was talking about breathing in and out through your nostrils, I try to make an effort that when I listen to podcasts at night, or if I'm reading, that's my time where I really try to train myself to breathe in and out through my nose. So I'm just trying to use almost the existing parts of my daily routine to try to introduce some of those good practices that keep me feeling healthy and strong.
That's really powerful. And it reminds me of James Clear in Atomic Habits. Have you read that book?
No, I haven't.
It's just basically about habits and how to create ones that get you to that level of life that you want to get to. And he talks about part of, the things that he recommends as far as getting new habits is attaching it to already existing ones. And so you just said something, I'm like, yes, absolutely. Like, what a way to make it easier for yourself if it's just attached to something you already do. So I think that's great. And he also talks about this line, like this demarcation. And I know, in psychology, I have a psychology degree. I'm not as advanced in my education as you are, but I know in one of my classes, they talk about the neurotransmitters and how, with the sodium and like all these different like chemicals that come inside. And then like after a certain point, it hits like this line where it's like, as soon as it hits it, everything fires. And so it's kind of like the same with habits where there's this line and we're doing these habits for a certain amount of time. And it isn't until you hit it that everything skyrockets. So it's almost like a patient work of just knowing that doing these things daily will eventually lead up to, a change or whatever it is that you're looking for. So thought it was super cool. So what would you say are the top 2 to 3 reasons people struggle so much with performance anxiety?
A lot of research seems to point to that the struggles with performance anxiety are traceable back to our core beliefs. And so core beliefs around us, for example, not feeling good enough, and also beliefs around the fact that feeling good enough is tied to the approval of other people. And I think that's also where we get into trouble with performance anxiety is we look to other people to see, if we're doing a good job, we see things as high stakes situations. And so I think for a lot of people, it's core beliefs around, not feeling good enough, worrying about being liked by other people, fears around failing, fears around rejection, around achievement. And so it's all these things kind of lead to the perfect storm of having this performance anxiety. The third thing too is really our perceptions around the importance of being liked. And really, again, we see that so much in society as a whole in terms of the values that we place on being liked and how important that is. And so as a result of even the societal elements and values of being liked, I think what happens is that people sometimes see performance situations, or they see situations that maybe other people don't see as performance situations, as really threatening. What happens is when we feel threatened is that we don't feel safe. And when we don't feel safe, what happens is we have certain emotional control centers in the brain that really light up and that tell us that this is a really scary situation. You probably want to run from it. You probably want to evacuate this situation. And so what happens is that people really have like this emotional reaction that happens. And the second thing that happens is when that emotional control center in the brain gets lit up, it's called our amygdala. And when it gets all lit up, what happens is it kind of hijacks our prefrontal cortex, which is located at the front of our skull. So it's about here, right above our eyes. And what happens is in that prefrontal cortex, that's the part that you need to keep you thinking on your feet. That's the part you need to keep you in reading your environment, to read the nonverbal cues, let's say, of an interviewer, of your audience. And so what happens is people aren't able to be as present. So it's really, again, this perfect storm of core beliefs. We talked about fears. We talked about, feeling threatened, and really all of these pieces together really creates a lot of anxiety for people.
Honestly, I feel that way about copywriting. So right now I do copywriting for clients, and literally everything you said, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I have performance anxiety because I want them to love it so much. And I want to be seen as like doing a good job. And so, yeah. And even just with like my husband, he's a lawyer. I see that same thing, and other friends who are in high stress jobs. It's so prevalent. So did you ever struggle with performance anxiety before getting into the work that you do?
I love that you asked that question. Yes, I for sure did. And I would say public speaking anxiety. My first job outside of graduate school, that's when I was like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to feel really anxious in certain situations with public speaking. And the thing actually, what happens with performance anxiety, whether it's public speaking anxiety or other, is that it actually starts to spill over into other areas of your life. So places where you didn't feel anxiety before, you now start to feel anxiety. And it's because of the neural connections in our brain and the priming that happens. And so when certain connections in our brain become really strong and strengthened, then we tend to rely and default to those connections a lot more often. So that's why we see that spillover effect sometimes happen. But yeah, for sure, I did struggle with that and had to work through it. And in fact, I don't think I even had read a research article at the time on core beliefs, but that's just how I ended up tackling my own kind of fears. And then that's now an exercise that I use with my clients now, just from my own personal experience and working through it.
Okay. So for someone listening who does feel overwhelmed by their job, what could they do to ease that pressure or to work through healing that reaction?
overwhelm in general or overwhelm as it pertains to performance?
Pertains to performance anxiety.
So with performance anxiety, I mean, like I said, I think the best place to start is usually with the core beliefs, because it's not something that usually can be healed overnight. It's something that takes a lot of commitment to trying new practices. But one of the best ways, so besides really dissecting your core beliefs and really kind of evaluating them and kind of looking at the ones that aren't serving you and rewriting them, that's kind of one process that I take people through. But the second thing is really mini experiments. It's really about kind of getting people to put themselves out there, to be seen, to be heard, to be uncomfortable, and to put themselves out in these situations that they sometimes feel really nervous about, and kind of working your way through that. Another way that I really try to work people then through those mini experiments is through something I call intention setting. And what I do with my clients is that we talk a lot about, how do you want to feel in that, like, let's say performance scenario? How do you want to feel in that public speaking situation? How do you want to think? How do you want to feel? How do you want to act? How do you want to be? So we get really clear on those elements. But then I think the thing that people sometimes miss is that we then work through, how do you want your audience to feel? How do you want the interviewer to feel? How do you want the other people to feel on the other side? What are the key messages that you want to convey? Because the other thing that happens a lot of the time with performance anxiety, and this is actually what we found in my PhD research on interview anxiety, is that people are so much in their heads that they're not able to be present with their audience or with, let's say, a supervisor, with their leader, because they're having all these anxious thoughts. So part of the key is to help to get people outside of their heads, how to help them to be focused on the person that they're actually communicating with.
I'm like thinking I need to do that, because I definitely feel the effects of performance anxiety. And so going back to when you said the amygdala, like once that's triggered, it kind of just takes over everything and you don't have access to that prefrontal lobe like you normally would. So when it comes to emotional intelligence, because I know that's something you're also big on, you kind of have to like backstep from the amygdala, like knowing there's a trigger and then kind of asking yourself, okay, what's triggering it? Because I know you mentioned going back to your beliefs. So is it kind of just asking yourself those questions and then backtracking it?
So I guess one of the things I also have people do is a strategy that I call grounding, to kind of help them think. So one of the things I was just going to talk about right now, that I think when you were just talking about the amygdala, it just kind of made me think too about one of the ways to kind of calm that amygdala in the moment is through a strategy that I use called grounding. And so grounding basically is using your five senses and thinking about looking at what you see in your room. So for example, things that you might see on the wall, things you smell, things you're hearing, things you even feel, for example, feeling the chair beneath you or your elbows resting, let's say on the arm rest. And really what that does is it helps to distract your thought process in that moment. So that's just something else I was just going to add in terms of like what happens with people when they're so nervous. But sometimes when people are at that 9 to 10 out of 10 on the anxiety scale, where you're really, really anxious, getting them back down to that 6 or 7 type of zone is really about like using grounding, for example, strategies to help kind of bring them back down.
It's great. And I love too that you mentioned putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. And I've been doing that a lot this week, and I felt massive anxiety and I thought something was wrong with me. But it's good to know that that actually helps. And correct me if I'm wrong, but does it help? Because when you're in an uncomfortable situation and you see that you're okay, does that reinforce your confidence in yourself, or how does that work?
Exactly. No, I love the way you actually described it, is that it definitely does reinforce that, I'm okay. But the other thing that happens actually with anxiety and phobias is that it's paradoxical. The more you actually avoid it, the more that the fear actually grows stronger. So that's the other thing. So every single time you avoid a public speaking scenario, let's say you want to say no to something just because you're like, oh, I'm too anxious about doing it. You're telling yourself that I'm not, and that connection is getting stored somewhere really deep inside of your brain. And again, you're priming that connection we've talked about on here over and over again. And so really the process of kind of stepping outside of that and saying, I can do this. And part of it is like learning to tell yourself new stories. And so learning to tell yourself, I can do this. I am becoming someone who is comfortable with sharing their voice, or I'm looking for opportunities to share my own voice. So that's an example of a positive self-affirmation that sometimes people also use, and I'll work with them through so that they can start to tell themselves positive thoughts about their capabilities. And really, thoughts are such an important part of that equation that we talked about earlier with core beliefs, because a lot of research has shown that core beliefs lead to negative thoughts, and those negative thoughts are then what create the anxiety. So really, that's why I talked about starting with core beliefs as like the root cause of that relationship, to really target those thoughts. So you also need to really target those thoughts if you want to start to change your relationship with, let's say, performance anxiety.
So, given the current social climate and insane work pressures people may be feeling, or just performance anxiety in general, because I'm assuming it doesn't just happen in a work setting, it can happen in other ways. Do you have a few practical tips that someone can use? I mean, aside from the ones that you've given that increase their emotional intelligence, that gives them that resilience.
The key to really work on increasing your emotional intelligence is really to develop a better relationship with your emotions. And so really trying to get to know your emotions. And I think for many, many people, including myself in the past, sometimes I'm sure in the present too, is that we try to avoid negative feelings. We're really comfortable with negative feelings. So it's really trying to get to know yourself and get to know the situations that really tend to trigger you. Maybe even asking other people, like, do you notice when I feel upset, or can you tell how I'm feeling? Like, let's say you're a leader and you have other people on your team, like asking them the question, can you tell how I'm feeling at most times? And as I mentioned too, getting really clear on your triggers and getting to know your internal and external triggers. So I can share a personal example of one of mine is that at bedtime, sometimes we get to bed later than, I have 2 young girls at home, as you mentioned. So sometimes we're not always on time getting to bed. And that for me is a trigger of like wanting to feel control and wanting them to get them to bed at a certain time. So sometimes I need to kind of take a deep breath and say, it's going to be okay. Sun's going to come up tomorrow. Everyone's going to be okay. We might be a little bit grumpier, but everyone's going to be okay. And then also just kind of like noticing, okay, right now what I'm feeling is frustration. Right now what I'm feeling is an urge to control the situation. So just even the other night I was having that feeling, and I just remember again kind of stopping myself in my tracks and just saying, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And that sometimes we're going to get to bed later. And so just really using those opportunities throughout the day as really, again, looking back to my breath, as I told you earlier. So being connected to your breath is so important. And having those emotional check-ins, knowing your internal and external triggers are all things that are really key to help to cultivate emotional intelligence.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm going to listen to this again and really, I feel like I wanted to close my eyes so many times and just soak in what you're saying, because it just resonates so much. And I hope whoever's listening, it resonates for them as well, because it gives me hope that I can overcome my anxieties, and to see that you've been able to make great strides as well. And do you still feel it somewhat, or do you feel like the practices you've created in your life kind of dampen it enough?
I'm definitely human. And have I'm not going to sit here and tell you like I never feel anxiety anymore and I never have the performance peak. Like, of course those moments will, creep in, but I think the key is, do you have a toolkit to help you get through those moments? And that's why I call it a toolkit with my clients, because we work on building their own personal toolkits so that they can cope with these situations on their own. And so really for me, I'm a work in progress, just like anybody else. I ask myself lots of reflection questions, on a daily basis. I'll ask myself, what are certain situations teaching me? What's the opportunity here? And so I really try to look for the positive in most situations. But just like anybody else, I am a work in progress and have to commit time and energy to bettering myself daily.
Are there any books that you're loving right now?
I'm loving the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle. Have you read that book?
Not yet, but I hear so many great things about it.
Oh, I really, really appreciate Glennon's book. So the book is about Glennon Doyle, who really learns to listen to her own inner voice in a world that tells her how to be. And in fact, it really reminds me of myself 2 years ago, before really starting this journey and really kind of reclaiming my own inner voice and listening to myself. So what I love about her book, though, is that it's not told in chronological order. It's kind of like all these like anecdotes and stories that are told throughout, but it really kind of, she also gives you some practical tips on like, how she learned to be still with herself and how to listen to her own inner voice. But there's so many like stories throughout the book where I'll just be sometimes laughing, or it's such a good page turner. It's easy to digest, but yeah, I'm really loving it. How about you? What books are you reading right now?
That's great. I am, oh my gosh, it's so bad. And maybe I need to focus on not reading so many. I have like 4 books in rotation that's depending on my mood. I'm like, oh, I'm, into more like sciencey stuff, or like today I want more stories. So right now I'm reading Pat Schneider's book, Writing Alone and Together. I'm starting a writing group. And so she started this method that's really changed my life in a writing group in Zurich. And so I've been reading her book, and then The Seed of the Soul by Gary Zukav. I'm finishing that, and a few others, but those are like the main ones that I'm reading right now.
See, what I actually love about what you said though, by the way, is something that I always I strive to do on a daily basis, is you're actually leaning into what your body needs. Remember, like when I was kind of saying towards the start in that spiritual practice, like you're almost like leaning into like what you're craving at that moment. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. It's like, so I don't actually see a problem if you have 4 different books on rotation, because I think that's where you're going to learn the most, is if you're actually leaning into what you're gravitating towards. And so we always talk about gravity with my clients too, like listen to that gravitational pull. It's pulling you there for a reason. Right. So that's what I actually love about what you said. I'm kind of the same as you. Sometimes I'll have, a book of one week or one night and then moving on to the next. So,
oh, that made me feel so much better, because part of me is like, does that mean my brain is jumbled and I need to like just focus on one? So thank you for that. And actually what you said reminds me really quickly of this experience I had with The Seed of the Soul. So I started it when we were in Michigan during COVID, and I had thought that I finished it. And so it was like near my desk somewhere, just was like, oh, I'm done with it. And I actually had a Reiki session for the first time, like a few weeks ago, from a client. Actually, I was doing branding work for her, and she's like, you should try my Reiki session. I'm like, great. And it was actually pretty powerful. And like, I felt so aligned. And so just the energy was just like beaming off of me. And I remember when she was doing her work, a thought kept coming to my mind: you need to own your power. You're not owning your power. And it just kept repeating over and over. And I was like, okay, like I feel that I do need to own my power. And then that night I looked at Seed of the Soul on the floor, and I was like, did I actually finish it? And for some reason I felt compelled to pick it up. And where my bookmark was on the section that said power.
Wow, that's incredible. It's amazing how things will just pull you right back to, the universe will pull you right back to where it wants you to be at that moment, or again, picking up that book again. No, I think that's a really great story. And again, just, listening to what you need in that moment. And I guess it was a part of you too. It sounds like that was almost like thinking about what's your story right now? What's the chapter that you're in? That's something I always have to work with my clients through, and myself too, is just thinking about what chapter am I in, and work on telling myself new stories too. Like what are the old stories that I want to leave behind, so I can make room for the new stories. Sounds like there was a bit of that happening too there with you.
Definitely. Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Where can people find you?
So they can find me through my website, which is amandatobe.com, or they can follow me on Instagram, which is dr.amandatobe. And I try to put out different posts on my Instagram or on my blog, but especially on my blog, I really make an effort to try to make, again, that research accessible. So whenever I put a blog post out, I try to include the science behind it, additional resources, how you can put it into practice. So hopefully that would also help listeners. And I just want to thank anyone who is listening to this, and I really appreciated your time today as well, Francesca.
Of course. And we'll make sure to link everything that you mentioned in the show notes, so it's easy for them to click over and get into your world. And I definitely love your Instagram post and your blog post as well. So I'm excited for people to join as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now it's time for an affirmation. I intend to create stories that serve me and understand myself fully, so I can rise to meet my highest self. If you found today's tips inspiring or thought-provoking, share it right now on social media and make sure to tag me at Francesca A. Phillips or at Find Your Good Space, and also weigh in the comment section at findyourgoodspace.com. You can find links in the show notes. And if you have a spiritual or mindfulness problem that you want me to unpack on an upcoming The Good Space episode, or an awesome manifesting story you want to share, give my podcast phone line a ring right now at 917-719-0867. Also, don't forget to download my free morning routine guide. It's what helped me reduce my anxiety, increase productivity, and so much more. The link to everything I mentioned is in the show notes. See you soon.